It's called Kaliningrad. It has a population of 1 million, and it sits between Lithuania, Poland, and the Baltic Sea. And while it's separate from the rest of Russia, it's strategically important.
Here is a place on the European borders, 370 kilometers from Russia. A territory that once belonged to Germany yet is now under Russian jurisdiction. It is not adjacent to Russia, nor does it seem to fit the geographical puzzle, yet it is Russian. This piece of land, known as Kaliningrad, makes us ask, why does Russia own this old piece of Germany? Join us in this video as we uncover this mystery and tell you the fascinating story of this far-off land. Let's take a journey back in time. Kaliningrad was not always Russian. It was once part of Eastern Prussia, a region held by both Poland and Germany. The city, known as Königsberg back then, was started by a group of crusaders called the Teutonic Knights in 1255. It slowly became a place known for culture and deep thinking, even being the birthplace of the famous philosopher Immanuel Kant. But World War II changed everything. Königsberg was badly damaged by British bombs in 1944. Then in 1945, the city was taken over by Soviet soldiers after a tough fight that lasted a week. The once vibrant city was reduced to rubble. The war ended with some big changes to the map of Europe. At a meeting in 1945, known as the Potsdam Agreement, it was decided that Königsberg and the northern part of East Prussia would become part of the Soviet Union. The city, which had been a proud part of Germany, was now cut off. The main reason the Soviet Union was given this land was its location. The Soviets needed a spot for their navy where the sea did not freeze over in winter. Königsberg, with its location on the Baltic Sea, was the perfect choice. In 1946, the city was given a new name, Kaliningrad, after a Soviet leader named Mikhail Kalinin. And so began Kaliningrad's time as part of the Soviet Union, which later became Russia. Once World War II ended, things changed a lot for Kaliningrad. The city, known for its German culture, was now a pile of ruins. Soviet people came in to rebuild it, but it was not just the buildings that changed. The city itself started to feel different. When the Soviet Union took over, lots of people had to move. 500,000 Germans who used to live in what was then Königsberg were forced to leave the country between 1945 and 1947. They had no choice. Many others left because life had become too hard. They were replaced by people from different parts of the Soviet Union. Many of these new people were soldiers or workers. They did not have any connection to the city's past as a German city. Slowly, the German feel of Königsberg started to fade away. The Soviet Union tried to get rid of anything that was German. German street names were replaced with Russian ones. In 1946, the city was given a new name, Kaliningrad. It was named after Mikhail Kalinin, a leader of the Soviet Union. The goal was to make the region completely Soviet. The buildings started to go up amongst the ruins. These buildings were simple and practical, very different from the old German buildings. The old, beautiful city of Königsberg was replaced with a city that looked more like a Soviet one. The change in the city was a big deal. For the Soviet Union, Kaliningrad was a useful place to have. It was like a little piece of the Soviet Union right in the middle of Europe. The port was filled with military ships. The area became an important base for the Soviet Navy. This made Kaliningrad very important. It was now a key military place.
But we know about the sanctions. The Times reports a choking off of the supply of items such as iron, washing machines, crockery and perfume. The governor of Kaliningrad says 40 to 50% of rail imports are affected.
In 1991, a massive shift shook Kaliningrad and the rest of the world. The mighty Soviet Union crumbled, and in its wake, 15 independent nations emerged. Kaliningrad found itself in an unexpected position. It was still part of Russia, but was now surrounded by two independent nations, Lithuania and Poland. The end of the USSR brought about great changes in Kaliningrad. The city that was once a vital military base and a proud symbol of Soviet power found its role drastically diminished. The Russian government was dealing with its own challenges from the fall of the Soviet Union, and resources to support distant Kaliningrad were scarce. The city's isolation became more evident. Kaliningrad was now a Russian island surrounded by EU nations. Its residents needed visas to visit neighboring countries, which were not required before. The free flow of goods also stopped, hurting the region's economy. Kaliningrad, once a bustling trade hub, struggled to sustain itself. The economic problems were severe. The end of subsidies from Moscow led to the collapse of many industries. Unemployment rose, and so did crime rates. The 1990s were a difficult time for Kaliningrad, with hardships that some liken to the post-war years. A shocking fact is that in the mid-90s, the region's crime rate was 20% higher than the Russian average. Despite these challenges, the people of Kaliningrad strived to create a new identity. They wanted to re-establish connections with the rest of the world, and they looked towards Europe. Their location, after all, was closer to Brussels than to Moscow. Some even suggested that Kaliningrad should become a free city, or return to its German roots and reclaim the name Königsberg. While the Russians might not have focused heavily on Kaliningrad at the time, they ensured its continued allegiance, taking steps to prevent the region from breaking away or being lost to foreign influence. In the late 90s, Kaliningrad began to see some improvements. The Russian government introduced special economic zones, or SEZs, in the region to stimulate growth. These zones were a significant step for the local economy. They meant reduced taxes and eased customs regulations, making the region more attractive to businesses. Foreign investors were encouraged, and slowly, the economy started to revive. As an example, consider the story of the German company BLG Logistics. They took advantage of the SEZ incentives and decided to invest in Kaliningrad in the early 2000s. BLG set up a car assembly plant in the region, taking advantage of the geographical proximity to European car manufacturers and the SEZ's tax benefits. The plant became a major employer in the city, signaling a new era of industrial growth for Kaliningrad. Many other foreign companies also followed suit, and this is how Kaliningrad began to develop. Today, Kaliningrad serves a pivotal role for Russia as its western outpost. Despite the distance from the Russian mainland, the region remains an essential part of Russia's strategic interests. Positioned between Poland and Lithuania, both members of NATO and the EU, Kaliningrad functions as either a bridge or a barrier between Russia and Europe. Economically, this city acts as Russia's gateway to Europe, even though recent times have brought challenges.
I believe now everyone in Kremlin realizes that this attempt will lead to a war with a country which is a NATO member and an EU member.
Russia knows that war with one NATO member means war with all NATO members.
The recent war in Ukraine has brought fresh attention to this outpost. For instance, Russia reportedly dispatched an army corps of 12,000 troops from Kaliningrad to Ukraine, emphasizing the region's strategic military importance. Simultaneously, Kaliningrad's position has been complicated further by disputes with its neighbors. Lithuania has decided to halt the transports of EU-sanctioned goods from Russia to Kaliningrad. This has added to the existing friction. Such actions have raised concerns about Kaliningrad becoming a new flashpoint in Russia's conflict with Ukraine. In the shadow of these tensions, Russia's nuclear presence in Kaliningrad, close to European capitals, has stirred unease among neighboring Lithuania and Poland. Following the end of the Cold War, these nations, along with Latvia and Estonia, sought safety in NATO. However, escalating tensions could potentially put a wedge between these Baltic states and the rest of NATO. Lithuania, having been a vocal critic of Russia in the EU, finds itself in a particularly difficult position. Any escalation could potentially lead to Moscow seeking a land corridor through Belarus to Kaliningrad, disrupting the geopolitical balance. Meanwhile, NATO member states such as Germany have troops stationed in Lithuania and Poland. These nations could find themselves drawn into this complex web of conflict because they are present between mainland Russia and Kaliningrad. As the story of Kaliningrad continues, it shows us how Russia and Europe interact with each other. This small region's importance in world politics remains high, even today. Looking from the heart of Russia, Kaliningrad might seem a reliable stronghold, but the shifting sands of geopolitics could turn it into a liability. These changes pivot on what will unfold in Belarus. Due to the scenario between Russia and Ukraine, Belarus' ruling regime could be toppled. With economic turmoil, strikes, political unrest, the country could spiral into chaos. The soldiers who have been battling on Ukraine's side could return, fueling an uprising to drive out Russian forces from Belarus. What happens then to Kaliningrad? This outpost, already stretched thin supplying troops for the Ukrainian conflict, would find itself encircled by unfriendly borders. Such a geopolitical twist would put Kaliningrad under severe pressure. Already banned as a terrorist state by Lithuania for its actions in Ukraine, Russia could find both Lithuania and Poland squeezing Kaliningrad. This isolation would seep into the economy too. Sanctions would choke off land imports, with only risky sea routes remaining open. Shortages would become the norm, and everyday life for residents would grow increasingly difficult. Under such a bleak scenario, Kaliningrad could fade into insignificance, but this is just one possibility. If Russia bounces back economically, harnessing its energy exports to Europe, it could rebuild its military power. And in that scenario, Kaliningrad with its Iskander missiles and Baltic fleets might play a crucial role in Russia's comeback. What lies ahead for Kaliningrad is still up in the air. It could go either way. Russia might face some setbacks in Ukraine, but Belarus might still hang on. That keeps Kaliningrad on shaky ground, never knowing what is coming next. Or maybe there is a compromise deal where Russia keeps its hold on Ukraine and Belarus, keeping the conflict simmering. It is all uncertain, and it depends on how things play out in the neighborhood. Now that you know about the complex history of Kaliningrad, what are your thoughts on its geopolitical challenges? How should this region navigate its complex situation? Share your opinions with us in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.